Recipes from our grandmother's cookbooks in the 50s were truly one of a kind. They would confidently claim that each one was a masterpiece worth remembering. But why did Grandma swear by these recipes? And should we too? So we're going to start off with buttermilk fried chicken, which is actually one of the best ways to have fried chicken, period. This recipe is pretty much known for one thing, and that's how soft the fried chicken is compared to your traditional ways of making it. You can thank the buttermilk for this because it puts in a lot of work tenderizing the chicken, and the end result is a chicken that's soft, easy to coat, and pretty much ideal for even pan frying. Buttermilk fried chicken was one of the best recipes of the 1950s, and a lot of authentic recipes even had the habit of putting in cornmeal. There were all kinds of regional differences too. In the Midwest, you would usually get pan-fried buttermilk chicken, but in the South, it was a lot more common to oven fry something instead. It helped to have these kinds of quirks region to region, because it meant you would get a slightly new recipe each time, though buttermilk fried chicken was always far more popular in the South than anywhere else. So if you ever really wanted to impress the family with your cooking skills in the kitchen, you'd go for a select few showstopper recipes. One of these was a salmon casserole surprise, which is just as exciting as the name makes it sound. So here, you would stuff the salmon and all the rest of the ingredients in the dead center of the pastry and make small pockets of air on top so that it would rise properly. The other ingredients would usually be lots of herbs and other aromatics, but the end result was a casserole that was rich in flavor and had an amazing texture. The best part about this casserole is that, unlike most traditional ones, you could pretty much serve this cold too. Also, it could be made and prepared in advance and baked later, so you could essentially just keep it around until you needed it so that you could have it absolutely fresh. Taste-wise, this is as much of a surprise as it might make you think from the name alone. The rich salmon flavors shine through wonderfully, and they're a lot more vivid than in traditional salmon casserole recipes. So, classic beef spaghetti isn't really one you need to rack your brain about too much. I'll tell you the practical reasons why this got so popular, and then we'll move on to some quality assurance. Spaghetti was one of the cheapest things to get, and it meant that you could be as full as you can be on a budget. It also meant that you could spin your dinner any number of ways thanks to all the variety that comes with spaghetti. On the other hand, it was a lot of carbs and no protein, and that just can't fly. What's an easy fix? Take advantage of the booming convenience food industry and live in the lap of comfort. People started using cheap canned beef along with their spaghetti to make up a meal in a hurry, and it was often one of the best low-effort recipes you could go for. Of course, it wasn't necessary to do it that way. You could go the hard route and prepare your beef from scratch, use high-quality spaghetti, and really put out all the stops. However, a lot of people had this as dinner so frequently that most home cooks, especially grandmas, just stuck to the low-effort versions of it. Country chicken and gravy is pretty much as South as you can get. It's always been a staple up there, and for good reason too. There aren't many things that go this well with corn, green beans, buttermilk biscuits, and mashed potatoes. That pretty much covers the extent of the sides available in the South anyway. Jokes aside, it's one of the healthiest recipes to keep in your rotation and a great one to include if you're trying to see some gains at the gym. It's simple enough, takes little work, and on top of that, you end up with something that you can pair up with just about anything. This is also why a lot of grandmas chose this recipe and why it got so popular. You could pretty much always work with what you had and not have to go on a grocery trip just to make the recipe work. If one day you didn't have beans, you could always just go for mashed potatoes. If you were feeling a bit more celebratory, you could even go all out and bake an apple pie to go with it. There wasn't any shortage of combinations that this recipe worked with. Something that you can associate both with how often it was made in homes and with diner culture is probably skillet pork chops. You'd go out to any roadside diner and see this on their menu, and most of the time it was pretty good for the almost too reasonable price point. On the other hand, when your grandma started making this at home, you knew you were in for either a big celebration or a really good time. Pork chops are always in the hearts of people as this messy, rustic, and explosively flavorful Southern dish that you just always have whenever you're visiting family. Doesn't help that it goes so well with a glass of cold beer and some barbecue sauce, too. Otherwise, you could still make a case for other recipes. A lot of families had grilling setups exclusively for dishes like skillet pork chops, which over time became their go-to over everything else. So chicken and Andula gumbo was a pretty cultural recipe that was unique to some parts of the South. It was supposed to be one of those dishes that would keep most of the work to just one pot. It was also one of the few things around that used okra, and that really made it a novelty at first. This recipe really makes extreme use of the andouille, which is a French sausage that first got its start in Normandy. The key trick here is that it's usually made with all kinds of flavorings. Now, in the land of the French, you could go up to a butcher's shop and ask for wine sausage without it being a freak conversation. In Louisiana, though, not so much. When the first French immigrants eventually came here and started to spread the roots of their cuisine, they adapted a lot of recipes to suit the American markets and butcher shops. This meant using sausages and substituting those traditional flavors of home with things like cayenne, and smoking the sausages a lot more than you normally would. Gumbo, on the other hand, is a dish right out of the heart of African traditions in a variety of cultures. It's a stew that got really popular in Louisiana, and for good reason. The combo with andouille was lethal, as the spicy sausage worked perfectly with the rich and vibrant flavors of gumbo. Thanks to the Depression, one of the biggest habits that stuck around with people was the idea of adding beans to almost everything. Green beans amandine was pretty much that concept put to daily use. Beans were one of the most inexpensive things you could grow or buy, and they would go with just about every kind of recipe you were used to. A lot of home chefs really prioritized practical cooking over having flashy recipes that took a lot of prep work and barely any time to finish. Don't get me wrong, they could do those too, but you're here for some easy and good recipes to make at home, aren't you? Amandine was also one of the best things to serve as an appetizer at parties because it worked really well as something to munch on while you talked and socialized. It also worked as an entree in French restaurants because it was light enough that you'd still have a lot of room left over, but it was still perfect for getting your appetite warmed up. One of the best examples I have of beans being the phenomena they were is 3-bean baked beans. Yes, this was a dish that consisted entirely of different kinds of beans, and it is actually so much better than you're thinking. This variation was kind of like a bean casserole, and it was made using 3 different kinds of typical southern beans. You would have your pinto or navy beans, and then for protein, texture, and firmness, you would add kidney beans. Then, butter beans and/or lima beans would work for flavor and as a topping, and you were pretty much ready to go. Once you had layered your dish, all you had to do was bake it. This was one of the best ways to get a lot of protein into your diet while keeping everyone full. It was one of the most nostalgic dishes that the working class of that generation ever had, and it was something that loads of people grew up with, myself included. There was nothing like coming home to the scent of grandma making fresh baked beans and leaving no stone unturned in terms of effort and preparation. Plus, it would usually go extremely well with barbecue and steaks. Country Captain Chicken, on the other hand, has some roots that go right back to the spice trade between India and America during the 18th and 19th centuries. It was apparently a British recipe that was made using Indian inspirations, and the term country captain was pretty much used by sailors back then to refer to Indians who were landholders. It was extremely common in Georgia and South Carolina, and it was one of the very first examples we have of real fusion food. Country Captain Chicken itself is a curry stew that has boned chicken, lots of bell peppers, an extreme amount of garlic, and just a touch of curry powder here and there. Then, you put in some raisins and dried fruits for some additional firmness and sweetness, and you're pretty much good to go. In the South, this was a massively celebrated dish. It even had fans up in the White House, as reportedly, Franklin Roosevelt and George Patton were apparently big fans of the dish. It's one of the earliest examples of American cuisine that has a midway point between American, British, and Indian influences. And it didn't take a long time for this dish to spread outside of the South, too. If you really want to go the retro route, then you can't go without exploring all the gelatin madness that took over the 50s. It was a big trend, too, especially with your salads. One in particular is something we're going to be taking a closer look at, and this time it's Pina Colada molded salad. This dish is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. It shows the elements of American cuisine slowly changing, with the introduction of more and more pineapple in salads and homemade dishes and other tropical ingredients like coconuts. It also foreshadows how much of a key player gelatin would eventually become in the overall landscape of American eating. This was usually lemon-flavored gelatin, and it was one looker of a dish, if nothing else, thanks to the use of it. It also helped that it had such vibrant and colorful fruits paired up with it too. Maraschino cherries and some pineapple do wonders for your aesthetic. Some people would also take it just a step further and add in rum flavoring, which would make the dish resemble a typical pina colada cocktail a lot more. All in all, it was one of the best and most fun ways to enjoy a salad again. Chicken thigh fricassee with mushrooms and rosemary was one of the best comfort foods to come out of the 1950s. It was all European. The fricassee itself is a cooking technique that comes from the French and refers to combining the act of sautéing and stewing. What you end up getting is a meal that's soft and flavorful beyond your wildest dreams. The creamy sauce here only helps to amplify all that and make it even more of a show stealer. The chicken thighs are used for a specific reason. They soak up and retain flavor better than others, but those had to be browned first so that they could start absorbing some flavor. As far as the mushrooms went, any mushroom you had available on you would work, but it was ideal if you could use cremini mushrooms. A lot of recipes that were authentic to French customs believed in using cremini ones because of their deeply earthy flavor. Chicken stock and a lot of heavy cream would be used for the broth and the cream, and the rest was just a matter of your favorite vegetables. To take this dish to the next level, many grandmothers in the 1950s added a splash of white wine to the sauce, enhancing the depth of flavor and giving it a touch of sophistication. Fresh rosemary wasn't just a garnish, it played a key role in infusing the dish with an aromatic, woodsy essence that complemented the mushrooms and chicken perfectly. Served over fluffy mashed potatoes or buttery egg noodles, chicken thigh fricassee became a go-to family meal. The dish wasn't just a dinner, it was a memory maker, perfect for gathering loved ones around the table, something grandmothers loved to do. It was one of the best comfort dishes you could make, especially around wintertime. On the other hand, if you wanted to have a summer dish that really put you in the mood for the season, there wasn't anything better to go with in the 1950s than Hully chicken wings. This Hawaiian dish pays homage to the state's incredible love of all things grilled and the harmony between the sweet and the savory. Hully is the Hawaiian word for turn, and it refers to the act of turning a chicken while you're grilling it on the spit to make sure that you get perfectly even cooking. Some of the influences in this dish are Asian, but a lot of it is also pretty strictly Hawaiian. I mean, it uses pineapple juice after all. It does use a lot of marination though, with the most extreme recipes even asking you to leave it up overnight. You have your typical culprits in ginger and garlic, but it also uses a lot of chili peppers to add a spicy kick to it. The marination really helps the case for Hully wings because it means that it's extremely hard to outdo these in terms of flavor. They're honestly one of the best meals you could have at a party. Of course, our grandmothers always knew how to switch up each dish. To elevate the recipe itself, they would often brush the wings with extra marinade while grilling, creating a sticky, caramelized glaze that was irresistible. Served with a side of fresh coleslaw or grilled corn, Hully chicken wings embodied the vibrant flavors of Hawaiian cuisine. The smoky char from the grill combined with the tangy sweetness of pineapple juice made this dish a standout at summer gatherings. It wasn't just about the taste. It was also about the fun of outdoor grilling and the festive vibe it brought to any dinner grandmas in the 50s did. By the 1950s, though, people were becoming aware of the lifestyle choices they were continuously making and how that was affecting things like their gut health. All the years of grills, wings, and casseroles take a toll on you. Still, it was hard for America to move on to no-protein salads that consisted almost entirely of Ivy League superfood vegetables like kale and broccoli. A better place to start the meat-addled population off was ham salad. This tangy, creamy salad involved a lot of diced ham blended with mayonnaise, mustard, pickles, onions, and just about every other familiar crutch you would need to get you into the habit of eating a salad. It wasn't the healthiest one, so to speak, but it was definitely a lot tastier and easier to swallow. Plus, you could throw in some croutons for some real fun and actually get to enjoying your salad. It was inexpensive too, since a lot of these vegetables aren't really ones that sink their teeth into your wallet. Ham is also one of the most common things in anyone's pantry, so it didn't take a lot to get familiar with this recipe. Two aspects of the 1950s that are largely forgotten were ducklings and roasts. These concepts had a perfect marriage in one recipe, and that was cranberry orange roast ducklings. It was a really celebratory dish, the kind of thing you would roll out for big days and events, maybe a birthday, maybe a holiday dinner. Either way, it was a recipe that utmost home chefs and grandmothers really kept close to their hearts. They even passed it down in family cookbooks for generations, so go figure. One of the best things about this dish was also its use of cranberries, which are particularly a holiday season favorite in America. The ducklings were used for their tender meat, and the roasting was done to give it some crispy skin and juicy meat. This was one savory dish that also used a lot of sweeteners on top of the already zest-filled oranges. It used things like maple syrup and honey, and this was actually done so that the cranberries wouldn't be too overbearing. You had to be pretty thorough with the prep work here, which is why it was a dish that veteran grandmothers excelled in. Welsh Rarebit was sometimes referred to as rabbit, though it doesn't really use any of the little critters. It's a pretty traditional British dish that's been a staple of the cuisine for more than a century or so. The best parts about this are that it uses a cheese sauce that also mixes in ale and beer, which I'm sure is a twist that you aren't used to hearing about at all. It gives the sauce some depth, at least flavor-wise. Some people use milk instead because they want an easier going and milder flavor, though. It was easy enough to make that home cooks here could adopt it without any issues, but it was fancy enough that you felt like you were dipping your toes into some unexplored areas of another culture. Plus, people really weren't used to the concept of a cheese sauce, which is strange for a country that's as intimate with cheese as America is. Still, the dish retained a lot of popularity for multiple reasons, though I'm really not sure what the logic was behind also referring to it as Welsh Rarebit. For a lot of Depression-era related reasons, soup had become especially popular in America, especially cream soup, and one of the easiest ones to make was cream of celery soup. This was a traditional recipe that was popular in the South for many years. It was used to give easy nutrition to families and feed people on a budget. Both happened to be things that this recipe excelled at in particular. People would usually go extra hard on the cream to add some real texture to it, and it stopped feeling like a soup at some point with particularly cream-focused families. Still, it was good for getting some greens into people's diets, especially kids. People would typically just serve this with bread or another main course, but the dish was fine enough to eat on its own too. You might be wondering what I meant when I mentioned the Depression, though. During that entire period, and thanks to the war efforts later on too, soups and Americans had become pretty much best friends. They were one of the most convenient and healthiest ways to feed a crowd, and the acquired taste wasn't something the public was shaking off anytime soon. Church supper holdish was a bit of a nice recipe. It wasn't really the most popular one out there, but if you were a frequent churchgoer or part of the local community, then you probably had heard about it more often than not. It was really famous at church suppers, and yes, I know it's in the name, as well as potlucks. It was an affordable dish that pretty much made use of leftovers and staple ingredients like rice, potatoes, ground meats, and canned rations. It was made to fill up a crowd, though, and naturally, only a really hungry crowd would be there at these church gatherings. At any one given time, they'd make a giant pot of the stuff, which really added a nice atmosphere to the potluck whenever this was made. Some people think that it evolved from Depression-era stews that made use of leftovers just the same way, but others think it's been a traditional recipe passed down in church circles that's just really popular. One of the best things about this was that it was possible to make it ahead of time and also easy to transport it wherever you'd need it. It was really common to make this when doing food drives, too. Crown roast of lamb is a spectacular dish that is pretty much only reserved for main course purposes. You could call this the most valuable player on a menu or the main character, and you wouldn't be wrong. It's a traditional dish that's, by custom, preserved usually for holiday feasts and big celebrations. So it works in a funny way too. You take 2 racks of lamb and tie them together in the shape of a circle. Now the crown bit comes from how they're arranged this way with their bones exposed, kind of looking like a skeletal crown. Makes it a great dish for Halloween. The rib bones are also usually Frenched, which means the meat's removed. They're also dolled up, and by that I mean most traditional recipes ask you to throw in some decor by putting paper frills on those rib bones. Maybe that's not exactly up your alley, but it adds to the fact that this is a festive dish. It's not really light on the seasoning either, or the stuffing, both of which it uses in extreme amounts. You end up roasting the lamb and serving it with potatoes. It's a delicious dish that fetches a high price outside the home and takes a lot of work if you're making it from scratch, but is usually worth it. Another dish that you have to put some work into as far as presentation goes is a pesto pinwheel. And yes, you actually do make an entire pinwheel. You roll up that pesto filling in a dough first, which, by the way, crescent roll dough works best. Then, you take that pastry, slice it, and bake it until it's golden, and then you place what you've sliced in such a way that it resembles a pinwheel. Additional toppings can include cheese and olives, and personally I think the dish doesn't even work unless you generously serve it with olives. Pesto is pretty much an Italian concept, but the pinwheels are something that you can say came from a Mediterranean influence. They weren't always here naturally, and it's not something Italians would dare come up with. As fun as it is, it would be considered next to blasphemy there. Still, that's a lot about how it looks, and not enough about how it tastes. This makes for a pretty lighthearted and energizing appetizer that sets the tone for the rest of the dinner perfectly. It also reflected the times and how people really got into creative, visual-heavy baking around the midpoint of the 20th century. Coronation Chicken Brexit rolls are a pretty fun little take on Coronation Chicken, which was originally designed to celebrate Elizabeth II. It was taken in wrap form as both snarky political commentary on post-Brexit Europe and because it simply made for a significantly better appetizer this way. Don't ever let people tell you your food can't be political, because it definitely can be. This version of Coronation Chicken is the perfect British snack to have at a party or to keep a bit of with you. It's insanely portable, so it's ideal for any kind of party or picnic. You could also just whip it out as a snack, and that would work perfectly fine. See, the funny thing here is that wraps are pretty much more of an American thing than they are a UK thing. That's kind of why something traditionally and quintessentially British, like Coronation Chicken being used in wrap form, provides such good commentary on, well, Brexit. The sauce on the inside is a pretty spicy mix of mayonnaise, mango chutney, and Greek yogurt. The raisins and almonds give it a wonderful crunch, and overall, it makes for a delightful wrap that exceeds your expectations. Baked oysters with tasso cream is a pretty sweet dish that has the best of a lot of things. You have the brine of a well-baked oyster, but tasso ham on its own is a world apart from the typical ham flavor you're used to. These are both things you would usually find in Southern traditions and Creole cuisine, and it's one of those family-preserved recipes that grandmas pass down. The kind of thing they only teach you when they know you're ready and won't mess it up. The fresh oysters are actually baked in their shells, which is just a little bit away from convention. Then they get topped with a sauce that's been mixed in with the tasso ham, and that really rounds off the flavor profile here. You have lots of sweet notes with smoky aftertastes, and it makes it nearly irresistible. The sauce also makes a lot of use of shallots and paprika, plus a decent amount of butter, cream, and cheese. Overall, this is one of the best things we've salvaged from the nearly ineligible diaries of grandmas active in the 1950s. It's definitely a national treasure for seafood lovers. If you think oysters are your thing, then this is one recipe you have to try. If you do, share your experience down below. Onion Yorkshire puddings are another twist on the classic that got really popular around the 1950s. It shows how much people wanted to play around with tradition and conventional recipes back in the mid-20th century. I think they might have just gotten bored of doing the same stuff over and over. Yorkshire puddings were typically made with a batter of eggs, milk, and flour baked in a hot pan with some drippings. but you would never think to add any sort of onions in there. It meant that the roasted meat and gravies now had another flavor they were working with. This was pretty much exactly what this plain Yorkshire pudding recipe needed. Some contrast, which the onions did amazingly well at providing. Some people would throw in caramelized onions, which they swore up and down worked really well with the roasted taste of the meat. You could either add the onions right into the batter or put them in the fat right before you mixed in the batter. You'd need to spend just a little time baking this, but it was worth it. This was one of the best savory puddings of the decade, and it was a great new take on the ever-so-simple Yorkshire pudding. Don't get me wrong, the basic pudding recipe that we grew up with has definitely done a lot of good work, but I think it's time to put that one to rest. Remember how I told you that all things gelatin were becoming increasingly popular? Kelly's ham JellO salad is a wonderful showing of that. It shows you how much fun people wanted to have in the 20th century with their food, and I think I know why. After decades of rationing and only making the most practical, frugal, budget-saving meals people could think of, I think it was extremely cathartic letting their culinary creativity loose and trying all sorts of new wacky combinations. This ham JellO salad actually managed to stick to the wall rather than miss, because it did extremely well at potlucks, family events, and all kinds of parties. It was a molded gelatin dish that used shredded ham and ingredients like pineapples and olives in a molded gelatin base. I know that just sounds like the most random assortment of ingredients ever. I mean, seriously, ham with olives? Pineapple? Celery? Who thought of this? I need to thank them. I never knew these ingredients could work so well with each other, and I don't think a lot of people would have known that fact either if not for this salad. As far as all the crazy gelatin-based dishes go, this is definitely one of the significantly more memorable ones to come out of the decade. It's sad that it pretty much faded with the generation of boomers that would take the time to prepare it, though. Another invention of the decade that reeks of pure innovation? Tube steak and eggs. So, you hear tube steak and you think you might be working with some brand new cut of meat that only got popularized in the 21st century, right? The tube steak is actually just slang. The slang in particular refers to the idea of using hot dogs in tube form and serving them alongside eggs. See why I said invention with so much sass now? It's not a steak at all, but it is a casual breakfast that works amazingly well in diners, low-key breakfasts and brunches, and all kinds of camps. This is a really good savory combination that plays off the richness of eggs really well, and it's also a gym bro favorite. All those sausages and eggs make for a lot of protein, and that's right up with the caloric needs of most meatheads anyway. Now you could turn it up a notch and add hash browns into the dish too. Or a side of vegetables like tomatoes and spinach, but that was usually something people did without. The hot dogs would pretty much be pan-fried, or you could also grill them if you really wanted to bask in the smoky nature of this dish. It was a great little casual breakfast that you could prepare without much fuss, or even just prepare in advance and then cook later. It helped to have food like that, especially given how much people were working in the 50s. Jellied hamburger with Vienna sausage is another unique aspect of the 1950s that exists specifically in that little 10-year-long bubble. This was rode by Vienna sausages, and it also is the last stop on our list. This also used gelatin molds, and it combined lots of savory influences and aspects to make for one extremely visually appealing dish. This was the kind of thing to catch your eye at a party, or if you saw someone ordering it at a table, you'd stop the waiter and ask them what that was. It represents the era's growing obsession with gelatin almost perfectly, and it was supposed to be something that you could flex about, discuss, as well as enjoy and dig into. Here, the hamburger is encased in gelatin, and it serves to be the center of the entire dish. It's then surrounded by lots of Vienna sausages, and they're supposed to be arranged all fancy. The patty itself is also mixed into the gelatin mixture, and there are lots of seasonings to go with it, like Worcestershire sauce and mustard. I know you must be thinking this is just the oddest mix of ingredients and toppings ever, and I wouldn't really blame you. It's definitely one of the most experimental burgers ever, but apparently it worked in cookouts back then. Can you imagine your grandmother playing around with gelatin and hamburger patties? Would you try this out and give it a fair shot? Speaking of economics, the following mom-made specialty was homemade pasta sauce. Recently, I was quite shocked to see the huge amounts of jar-filled pasta sauces, as my mom taught me the old-fashioned way to make it with the use of only a few ingredients. For example, the top components to make an awesome-tasting sauce consist mainly of the following: a couple of smushed-up red tomatoes, finely chopped onion, herbs, and spices. Now, bear in mind that I had two older brothers, so this sauce was a necessity, as their appetites seemed insatiable. Similarly, pasta sauce is closely associated with Italian cuisine. Although tomatoes were introduced to Italy in the 16th century, it wasn't until the 17th century that tomato-based sauces gained popularity, securing their place in culinary history. With its first mention in a cookbook compiled by a chef, L'Apiccio Moderno, in 1790. Jellied eels were a staple on the dinner table back in the 1900s. This dish was whipped up in London in the 18th century, when a bored chef decided to mix things up a bit. Here's the thing. Eels were dirt cheap back in the day, so they were everyone's favorite source of meat. The dish consisted of chopped eels boiled in a spiced stock and allowed to cool and set, forming a jelly. It was usually served cold and made a good substitute for dessert. Since it was light on the pockets, the English loved to serve it at dinner parties and festivals. It also made its way out to other parts of Europe, such as Denmark and Sweden, which came up with their own versions of the jelly. You won't find a lot of people talking about jellied eels now, because it has largely disappeared from the British menus. But hey, if you're ever feeling adventurous enough, I say give this one a try. Burgu may sound like something you would shout in a difficult situation, but this is in fact the everything stew of Kentucky, which has an interesting history. Settlers used whatever ground meat and vegetables were available in their kitchens in the preparation of this dish. If you were a pioneer in the wilderness, that meant wild game. Think squirrel, rabbit, and even raccoon. Most burgus served today are made from beef, pork, and chicken, cooked with corn, lima beans, okra, and tomatoes. Burgu is known for its intense, slightly smoky taste and thick, stew-like texture, which can be attained by slow cooking for approximately 24 HRs. Burgu is taken with utmost seriousness in Kentucky. However, burgu was the first festival food that was simmered in large kettles over burning coals and was offered to church gatherings, fairs, and political meetings. It was said that a great burgu could feed a whole town, and today, some places still make it in 100-gallon kettles, stirring with paddle-sized spoons. There is even a Kentucky Burgu festival where different cooks prepare and offer out the best-tasting burgu. As expected by this enduring tradition, no two burgu recipes are the same. Therefore, if you have never tasted burgu, get a recipe and allow the stew pot to do its magic. Remember, it will take time. This is not a dinner that you can prepare in the blink of an eye. It is an experience. This brings me back to one important aspect: the value of family. On the other hand, without going on a nostalgic tangent, let's delve into yummy baked potatoes, this time with a twist. Note that this version I am about to discuss has now transformed itself into a popular fast food item. Despite that, it is easy to do at home. All you need is a well-done baked potato, then stuffed with some yummy treats that are budget-friendly as well, and if you are feeling adventurous, a splash or two of sour cream. Perfect. Anyhow, this may seem like a new spin-off to many families, but researchers have discovered that native South American cultures have been using it as a staple for thousands of years. Although their techniques are questionable at best for modern society, as they usually include things like a banana stuffed with rice. Straight out of the royal family's dinner table, beef Wellington was a beef steak dish with the perfect regal twist. This delicacy was made of a tender beef fillet coated with pâté and duxelles, then wrapped in puff pastry, which made it just as fancy as it sounds. It was traditionally served with a rich red wine sauce, such as a Madeira or Cabernet Sauvignon reduction. Now, the origin of this meal is shrouded in history, but it is suggested that it emerged in England in the 19th century and was named after the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley. This steak required a lot of time and patience, which made it a meal for only the royals of England. It's a part of ancient history now, but you might be able to taste it if you make your way to Regal Balls or a Michelin star restaurant in London. Brunswick Stew is both heartwarming and mysterious. its true origins are still a matter of debate. Brunswick County, Virginia, and Brunswick County, Georgia, claim to be the birthplace of this tomato-rich stew, which dates back to the 19th century. Regardless of its origin, Brunswick stew has always been about using local, seasonal ingredients and stretching them to feed a crowd. Traditional recipes used wild animals such as squirrels or rabbits, but nowadays chicken and pork are the usual protein pick for this stew. The stew is thickened with crushed tomatoes, chicken, and lima seeds, sometimes adding a little barbecue sauce for an extra smokiness. Long ago, this dish was a communal affair, made in massive pots and often cooked over a wood fire for hours until every ingredient was melt-in-your-mouth tender. In Brunswick, Georgia, there's a 25-gallon cast iron pot that claims to be the original Brunswick stew pot. It's big enough to feed an entire town. Southerners have been known to argue over whose Brunswick stew is best, with each family passing down their own secret recipe. But whether you're making it for a crowd or just stocking up in the freezer, Brunswick stew will fill your kitchen with the scent of comfort and nostalgia. One of the most widespread hacks that got around like wildfire in the USA was the idea of speeding up the process of caramelizing onions by adding in some baking soda. Baking soda is a handy tool for many tasks, like softening vegetables or removing pesky stains. In the case of onions, it creates a pretty volatile pH environment, which helps the onions brown faster, better, and with a much richer flavor. This has to do with onions being more alkaline post-baking soda, and that really helps speed up the browning process. If you want to cut down on the prep time of your food without sacrificing the taste, and you find yourself putting in caramelized onions a lot, then this is one hack from grandma to us to you. The best homemade meal, in my opinion, was lasagna. Nowadays, people enjoy this dish on laid-back Saturday afternoons. And to be honest, I agree. Leave it in the oven for an hour, and a cheesy-filled indulgence is born. These components include the basic kitchen must-haves, layers of lasagna sheets, pasta sauce, and some cheese, of course. It has met those expectations of the history books as well. Did you know that its origins are implanted in the backstories of ancient Greece? Yes, you heard me right. This was not an original Italian cuisine. Nevertheless, many dispute that the first record of such a recipe being written down dates back to Naples during the Middle Ages. But wherever it started, it's now seen as a go-to dish in any household, no matter the country. The typical scrambled eggs breakfast has been more or less a national tradition for so many years, it is impossible to tell where it really started. Low-key, small-time diners, high-tier French-American restaurants, and steakhouses all serve some kind of variation on eggs, including scrambled-ons. Hence, what do you do to add a little bit of variety, texture, and a bit of spaz to this classical option? If mayonnaise can work wonders for a burger, why not try it here? No, seriously, you'd be surprised. We know most people never make the link between eggs and mayo, but they can actually make them so much more fluffier and add this nice creamy texture too. If you do not believe us, then just search up any grandma's recipe for mayo eggs. Do not knock it till you try it. Pressed duck, a French-inspired masterpiece, is just as complex as it sounds. The dish involves cooking a duck and then using a special press to extract the blood and juices, which are then used to create a rich, flavorful sauce. You heard that right? A sauce made out of blood and bone marrow. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, this dish was a showstopper at French restaurants back in the day, and its unique taste spoke for itself. The complex dish was a specialty of Rouen, and its creation was attributed to an innkeeper from the city of Duclair. It's also known as canard à la presse, and is a specialty of the Tour d'Argent restaurant in Paris. Cooking pressed duck isn't a job for the weak and requires special time and effort, which is exactly why it has become a rare dinner time on our tables now. And then, of course, not everyone has a knack for eating a sauce made out of bone marrow. Chopo is the ultimate coastal comfort food, a steaming bowl of seafood goodness in a tomato and wine broth that practically transports you to the Pacific coast. This Italian-American stew originated with San Francisco's Italian fishermen who'd throw together whatever the sea offered up that day, whether it was crab, clams, mussels, shrimp, or fish. The magic of Chiopino is in its flexibility. No hard rules here, just a satisfying mix of the freshest seafood around. The base is a flavorful blend of garlic, onions, tomatoes, and wine, simmered down to a rich, aromatic broth. Add in a touch of fennel for sweetness, a sprinkle of fresh basil, and some red pepper flakes for heat, and let each piece of seafood cook just until tender. Traditionally, Chiopino is served with a hearty loaf of sourdough bread. After all, no one wants to leave even a drop of that amazing broth behind. And here's a little fun fact for you. The name Chiopino comes from the Italian word siupan, which means little soup, though there's nothing little about the big, bold flavors in this dish. One spoonful, and you'll feel like you're catching a salty ocean breeze right off the San Francisco docks. Perfect for seafood lovers or anyone wanting to wow with a new recipe, this stew will steal the spotlight. Pair it with a crisp glass of white wine to complete the experience and savor a taste of the California coast. No travel required. Sometimes your fridge gets a due date for the scrapyard much earlier than it should. Sometimes the gas runs out and you are left debating a crisis. Do I let all my frozen stuff, my protein, and my milk go to waste? Or do I take some inspiration from my ancestors and try a neat little milk preservation hack? The next time you find yourself on the edge of a dairy disaster, try placing your bottled milk in a bowl of cold water. This next step is baby levels of difficulty. All you need is a wet cloth placed around the edges. Gets rid of those nasty bacteria, gets rid of your milk gone stale worries. We think it is an all-around win-win. When it comes to budget, nothing screams out more than that of chicken and dumplings. The meal can be regarded as boring, but it's a great tasting delicacy, especially during those cold winter months. Besides it being a great tummy filler, it is truly a great way to cook economically, as all you need to do for the chicken is boil it to the brim of shreds, either in some chicken stock. Next, boil together. As easy as this dish sounds, it is a true version of what family-oriented meals mean. It began as a mainstay in many homes during the Great Depression. Yet, other experts claim that this kind of eating originated when German immigrants first came to America, with the word dumpling translating to Knödel in German. Before chicken became everyone's favorite pie stuffing, rabbit pie was a favorite on the Easter table. Made out of tender rabbit meal, this savory pie was a household favorite in many rural areas. Rabbit meat is not only rich in flavor, but it's full of nutrients, which made this a healthy choice for many and a staple of the American pioneers. Plus, rabbit meat didn't cost a fortune like most meat back in the day and was widely available. Along with rabbit meat, ingredients of the filling of a rabbit pie typically included onions, celery, and carrots. Some English variations included prunes, bacon, and cider, while the Australians sometimes included the food paste Vegemite. Rabbits aren't as common as they were back then, so rabbit pie has vanished from our tables and Easter traditions. You know what? All good things come to an end. Now, the French weren't fans of the rabbit pie, so they decided to whip up a pigeon pie instead. Pepper pot stew is also known as the soup that won the war and has lots of spice, history, and tradition as well. Its origins were in the Caribbean, but it was embraced by African, Native, and Creole chefs who came to Philadelphia during the Revolution. It is stated that due to pepper pot stew, George Washington's soldiers were able to survive the winter they had ahead of them, which makes this dish a part of legends in American cooking. Tripe-based with hefty vegetables and hot peppers as the main ingredient, pepper pot stew is still spicy and peppery even to this date. This stew is hearty and comforting, and really has a full range of flavor profiles with deep, meaty tones complemented by the freshness of hot peppers. Allspice or thyme will give the stew warmth, while potatoes and dumplings make the stew richer and ensure that every drop of the broth is consumed. This food was originally sold on the streets of Philadelphia in the 1800s as pepper pot stew, cooked in steaming carts. It became so popular that even the city of Philadelphia earned the nickname of Pepper Pot City. While tripe is not as typical in contemporary renditions, this is a well-liked and distinctive dish. Give it a go to add some historic touch to the winter meals. pepper pot stew is not just a meal, it is history, put into a bowl, garnished with spices that will give your tongue a good telling off. This is one you have definitely heard about. Popeyes, Wendy's, KFC, or Burger King, there is nothing that hits that sweet spot in every corner of your head like some fried chicken does. Something about it makes it the perfect marriage between seasonings, oil, chicken, and breadcrumbs. You have probably tried this yourself too, but using baking powder on that chicken skin can get you some extra crispy zingers ready to go. Perfect for sandwiches, burgers, or just some chicken katsu curry. Ever feel like doing something extra with your chicken fillet? You know what to pull out of the cabinets. There's never been anything bad that came out of too much crispiness, except cholesterol issues and heart problems, but that's for like when you are 60 or something. Many agree that this simple meal can be enjoyed anytime, anywhere. It boils down to one universal thing: sloppy joes. I, however, do acknowledge that this might not be a very refined one. For this mom-made specialty, all you need are the basics, usually in your pantry or freezer, such as ground beef, salt, garlic, onions, and buns. You could opt to throw everything in a slow cooker or take an alternative route that saves time, taking a potato masher and tenderizing the sloppiness. Then you take a bun, toast it nice and warm, and slap on the meat, and there you go, a meal in minutes. The original story behind this meal dates back to Iowa, where a cook dished up loose meat in between bread with some tomato sauce. This then became a quick favorite amongst many Americans up until today. Every spoonful of Irish lamb stew is like the warm embrace of the Emerald Isle. This signature stew is simple yet soulful. It uses just a few ingredients: lamb, potatoes, onions, and carrots, although it's perfect for a warm winter's night. But the Irish tend to do it year-round, especially on cold and foggy days when you need something hearty to cut through the cold. The star here is, of course, the lamb, which is so tender it's almost melting. But don't overlook the potatoes. They're not just sidekicks. It thickens the soup and gives the stew a smooth texture. During the Great Famine in Ireland, lamb stew was made from almost anything available. And this authentic Irish lamb stew never used any fancy flour or thickeners, just the natural starch of the potatoes, and it was delicious. You'll know it's done when you can't resist the smell. To raise the bar to the next level, add fresh herbs like thyme or parsley, and serve with Irish soda bread to soak up every drop of soup. This stew is as straightforward as it is satisfying, proving that you don't need a lot of ingredients for something truly delicious. It's simple, durable, and just waiting for you to warm it up. Too much raisins can be pretty bad for you, despite what clickbait articles on the internet or Instagram info dumps will have you believe, unless you cook them the right way, which is by soaking them in some hot water before you get to baking. Something you must have noticed by now, whether we are dealing with fried chicken and pizza or rice and ground beef patties, is that every kind of food has the potential to get significantly better depending on the prep. If you just take a little bit of time out to add some things, soak them, place them in a proper container, and try a few hacks, then you can find yourself having a much better dish. In this case, the hot water makes them plumpier and amps up their properties as a natural laxative. You the type to struggle with digestion? This is a hack for you, plus all the other benefits like taming your sweet cravings or boosting your bone strength. Seems like Grandma really did know what was best for our bodies. This delicacy dates all the way back to the 17th century when James Hart, a Scottish physician, wrote in 1633 that pigeon pies were usually served with far too much pepper. It became an instant hit after Hart's paper, and people started cutting down on the pepper a bit. This crispy dish was a savory game pie made of pigeon meat and various other ingredients traditional to French cuisine. The buttery crust made it a luxurious treat which was common on banquet tables. It was a tradition for wives to make pigeon pie after their husbands spent long days hunting for the delicious bird. But hey, tastes change, and so do our feathered friends. This one is similarly another one you may have not only heard of, but seen, tried, and tested for yourself. Toasting spices in a pan can do wonders for their flavor. It is like steroids with athletes, except nothing about it messes up your system. Just a little bit of toasting can really bring out every last drop of flavor from whatever spices you are working with, and the end result you get is an explosively flavorful dish that packs thrice the punch you thought it would. Sounds like a pretty good deal this time too, right? Ever thought about why this happens though? You know how spices have these oils in them, and they are largely what is responsible for that banging taste we are all used to? Once you toast them, the heat starts to draw out those oils and it kind of puts them on turbo mode. Cumin gets more healthy, chilies are no longer just spicy enough to make your eyes water, but sweet and smoky too, and coriander really gets flavor. Next, we have shepherd's pie, also known as cottage pie, a meal that has always lived up to its potential. Whichever way you know this dish, it was one of the many staple meals in my childhood, as leftovers were assured. So, you might be wondering what is needed to complete such a savory pie. Well, I'm about to astonish you, as you only need mashed potatoes, butter, garlic, or herbs, minced meat, and cheese. First off, I would like to point out that there is nothing wrong with taking shortcuts in cooking, referring to the fact that nowadays, pre-packaged cottage pie cook-in sauce is readily available. So go ahead and skip on time if that is your heart's content and dish up a wholesome meal. Furthermore, historical facts are rather compelling, as they date back to the 18th century when this new dish was mainly served in a vast amount of regions throughout Ireland and the United Kingdom. Ever wondered what the ultimate American comfort food was back in the day? Well, the only right answer is the veal and ham pie. This hearty pie combined the delicate flavors of veal with the salty goodness of ham. The pie's popularity surged during the Victorian era. It originated in the kitchens of English settlers and was a practical choice for using up leftovers, but soon became a meal for the elite. While it was a luxurious delicacy in England, it was a staple in large households in America. Not only was it easy to whip up, but was also cheap to make, which made it perfect for communal gatherings and large families. Venison stew is a hearty, outdoorsy classic that transforms lean game meat into a warm, comforting meal. Imagine tender chunks of venison simmered in a savory, rich broth alongside carrots, potatoes, onions, and a blend of earthy herbs. Venison's natural, slightly sweet flavor shines in this dish, complemented beautifully by a splash of red wine or dark beer for extra depth. And here's the best part. Venison stew is for the adventurers, the hunters, or anyone wanting to shake up their winter dinner routine with something special. Venison isn't your everyday meat. It's low in fat but packed with protein, making it a perfect choice if you want a hearty meal that won't weigh you down. The key to a great venison stew? Letting it cook low and slow to bring out the meat's tender, luxurious texture. Fun fact: in medieval Europe, venison was so prized that only the nobility could legally hunt it, so this stew comes with a touch of gourmet history. Toss in a few juniper berries or bay leaves for a rustic, woodsy note, and don't forget a crusty baguette to soak up every last drop of that rich, flavorful broth. Ideal for sharing around a fire, real or imagined. Venison stew is wholesome, warming, and brings a taste of the wild right to your table. Here's a patty grilling technique endorsed by the culinary virtuoso himself, Gordon Ramsay. You get some nice beef patties perfectly shaped, seasoned, and ready to be slapped onto the grill for the most divine homemade burger you have had in the past 5 years. Turns out it was a bit too humid, the meat was a little dry, and the grilling took away all the moisture. You end up with a dry, chewy patty that does neither your teeth nor your taste buds any favors. So what's an honest burger lover to do? Put some ice cubes on that bad boy and let it grill. You will genuinely be shell-shocked at the results. The whole thing here is that it keeps that moisture locked into the patty, so the burger stays constantly juicy throughout the process, from the moment you put it on the grill to the moment it hits your plate. It is not like you have anything to lose by trying except like 4 ice cubes, so give this a shot. And remember, you can always take Ramsay's word for it too. Something that is ridiculously common in Southeast Asian households in America, but a little less known to natives of Uncle Sam's residence, is that rinsing your rice with water can do wonders for any dish. Literally, any dish that involves even the slightest hint of rice. This is because rinsing removes the extra starch packed into rice, giving you fluffier grains with minimal effort. If you are the type of person who enjoys their rice soft, airy, and mushy, then this is one kitchen hack you need to try. This time, you can thank brown grandmas for passing it on to the mainstream. Even culinary scientists like Matt Slem vouch for this. And just like with sticky pasta, nobody enjoys eating sticky rice. So you could not finish up all your pizza in one go, but you bet the gang that you needed an entire large one to yourself. It happens to the best of us, but do not let overestimation trap you into forcefully eating soggy leftover pizza. Reheat it in a skillet and get that crust crispy, fresh, and warm, all in one go. Just because something is a leftover does not mean you have to completely sacrifice the original quality. You can still get a lot of bang for your buck if you take the time to heat it the old-fashioned way. We know microwaves are convenient, almost dangerously so, but they cannot do everything that gas-based fire and kitchen utensils can. So if you really do not feel like sitting through mushy, soggy pizza crusts, you know what to do now. Pasta is a staple in any home, as it can be prepared quickly and affordably. One great example is Fettuccini Alfredo. It was always a dish to die for. These budget-friendly recipes included pantry favorites: fettuccine pasta, 2 sticks of butter, cream, seasoning, and garlic. Frankly, it might not be a favorite health-conscious option. While many assume Fettuccine Alfredo originated in Italy, this is not entirely accurate. Many speculate about this theory that it was recorded to have originated in Rome in the 20th century. However, it was invented by a man, Alfredo di Lelio. It is now a renowned dish known by many versions and has been published hundreds of times in cookbooks since as early as 1933. And Viola, a legend, was born. If you want to give your grandparents a rush of nostalgia, ask them about this meaty goodness, and who knows, your grandma might even dust off some cookbooks. Squirrel stew might sound unusual today, but it was a popular dish in rural areas. Yep, our bushy-tailed friends were once a common ingredient in many kitchens. Also known as Brunswick Stew, it was a tomato-based stew generally involving local beans, vegetables, and originally small game meat such as squirrel. However, many variations from around the world used rabbit meat too. The origin of this meaty stew is controversial at best, as the states of Virginia and Georgia both claim its birth, with Brunswick County in Virginia and the city of Brunswick in Georgia claiming it was developed there. To keep things peaceful, let's just say Virginia and Georgia both played a role in creating this delicious stew. Squirrel meat was easily hunted and provided a necessary source of protein. With the rise of chicken, squirrel stew has fallen out of flavor. But hey, this one is pretty easy to whip up and will satisfy your Thursday night meat cravings like no other. Just like breadcrumbs have become synonymous with providing the perfect golden, crunchy exterior, crushed cornflakes have the same reputation from our grandparents' days. Most things you would add this to, like chicken fillets or strips, would get significantly more crunchier and crispier. And the coating did not taste as much like cereal as you are thinking it would. It actually just tasted like pretty good skin, the kind that crumbles and falls apart in your mouth as you bite into it. Probably the biggest benefit of your grandma cooking things up this way was that it really cut down on the grease factor. That can leave even the most loyal, crispy chicken lover feeling bloated, oily, and a little turned off for the day. If you think the beef heart is off limits for cuisine, you're wrong, because stuffed hearts were once a celebrated dish. This dish sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was actually quite common. Think of the beef heart cleaned, stuffed with a mixture of breadcrumbs, herbs, and often pine nuts or raisins, and then roasted or braised. Sounds appetizing yet? This economical and tasty meal was a testament to the nose-to-tail philosophy of cooking, where no part of the animal was wasted. In Europe, the practice of stuffing animal hearts dates back to medieval times. It was a popular dish amongst the working class in England, while it was reserved for the elite in France. Eating hearts isn't as common today, but if you ever tried this one, you'd understand the hype. A golden rule passed down from grandmother to mother, and eventually to our generation, is that whenever you're cooking carbs like pasta or spaghetti noodles, you drizzle in a little olive oil. The trick here this time is that it prevents the noodles from sticking together, and we all like our noodles with extra twirling ability. Stacking up loads of pasta on a fork for a massive bite is one of the joys of pasta, to be honest, and that can only work if they are not all stuck together like somebody poured in hot glue. Olive oil can do literal wonders for this little problem that dominates most pasta-based dishes. And if you are new to it and want to make some killer Alfredo, remember to try this out. Mulligan stew is based on what is known as the hobo stew, in which you subject various ingredients to uncertain fates that result in an amazing stew. The factor that makes Mulligan stew stand out is the fact that it is one of the cheapest meals that can be prepared. Got leftover beef? Toss it in. An extra can of beans? Throw it in too. This consists of potatoes, carrots, onions, tomatoes, some appetizers, and whatever remains in the kitchen. In the Great Depression, massive quantities of Mulligan stew would be cooked in large batches and everyone would bring something to the kettle. This sharing and utilization of every little component is the essence of Mulligan stew. Oh, no preparations here, simply use your creativity. To give it a boost, season with a hint of Worcestershire, or alternatively, season with a pinch of paprika. So the next time you find your fridge is almost empty, then maybe it is time to bring out the Depression-era chef in you and try out Mulligan stew. It is the stew equivalent of the Mystery Box Challenge and will surely warm you. Let me know how you feel about all the crazy combinations of the 50s.